Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to part 3 on my series on tile maps. Last time we took this grid of numbers here and we drew them as tile sprites to the screen, but you probably already figured out by now that editing all of this by hand is very tedious. So that's why I use this program right here, Tiled. This is a free program that you can download from the link in the description. And I can load in a tile set right here, and I can just select a tile and just paint it in like it's a paint program. And very conveniently I can use multiple layers, so I have a second layer right here. If I turn that off, you can see a lot of the detail goes away. And you certainly need that because some of these tiles actually have a transparent background. So because they're transparent, they can actually be drawn on top of things. So that's very cool. And you probably have seen by now that this tile set is from Kenney once again. But this time, or just like last time, I scaled up all of the tiles so each one is 64 by 64 pixels. You don't have to do this, but I did that just so that everything is more clear on my monitor. So if we go into the map properties, over here, map properties, you can see that this map is 30 by 20 tiles. Not pixels, but tiles. So we got 30 across here and 20 down. Now you probably remember in our Lua code that we actually have properties like that in our map. So you can certainly see the usefulness of this, and we can also change that in the tile editor. But for now, I just want to show you how to export this. So I'm going to go to File, Export As, and please forgive the Japanese on my computer. I can't really change that right now. But I'm just going to export this out, and you want to select Lua, so .lua, and I'm going to call mine City Map. And you've probably figured out by now this is actually very convenient because our game engine is in Lua, and we can export out a map in Lua. So let's see what happens when we do that. Okay, so I'm back here in my code editor. And we just imported this file right here, citymap.lua. Now, as you can see, the whole thing is just one big Lua table. So I got all these numbers right here. And as you probably guessed, each one of these numbers corresponds to a tile ID. So if we go back into Tiled, and we select one of the tiles right here, well, each one actually has an ID associated with it. So this one is 0, this is 1, so it's just like what we had before. So that's good to know. This is 109. There's a lot of tiles here, so it's good that the program is handling all this for us. So if we go back and we look at the very top of the table, well, we have the settings from before. We got the width, the height, and we got the tile width and tile height. We're certainly going to need that. So let's make use of all this information. You'll notice that this whole table, with a lot of tables nested inside of it, is actually being returned here. So we can actually make use of that. If I go back into main, I'm going to get rid of this tile table because we no longer need that. So I'm going to call this gmapdef. So map definition is going to be require. So we can just do maps.citymap. And because this is Lua, we don't need to write .lua. So all I'm doing is I'm just taking that big table earlier, because remember it's being returned, and then it's returning itself and being stored in this variable right here. So that's like a very easy way to handle that. And then remember before how we put all of our tile data and then the width and height as separate parameters. Now we're just going to pass in the map definition. So I'm just going to pass that all in as one big object. I'll save that. And back here in our map object, instead of passing that in separately, I'm just going to call this params, or I can call it map definition right there. So now the map definition is going to drive all the data. So the width is going to be mapdef.width. The height is going to be mapdef.height. And then the cell size, you guessed, is going to be mapdef.tilewidth. And you probably noticed that I'm only using the width because we have square tiles. Maybe you'd want to pass in the height as well, but because I know it's squares, I can just use that. And a couple things I want to change here. I don't need this offset anymore because we're going to use a camera. And I don't need this offset. I don't need that offset. And if the tile is greater than 0, then draw. Okay, that's fine. Because we know that we start at 0 this time. Okay, we don't need this anymore, so I'm going to get rid of that. Okay. Now I think that should work, except now we need the most important thing, which is the tile data. What is the tile data gonna be? Well, if we go back to our city map table, you'll see that it has several children, and it has this layers child right here. And the first one is tile layer tiles 1. Well, if you remember from when we looked at it in the tile editor, we have these layers right here, and the first one is tiles 1. Well, that's pretty much the same thing. This table right here is our tiles 1 layer. So that's the first child of layers. So we can go back into our tile object and we can say mapdef.layers, and it's the first one. And we need more information, right? That first layer actually has a child called data. So we can just say layers1.data. And I think that should be it. So now I think we can see our map. Oops. Sorry, I changed the texture file. I'm gonna have to change that quickly. So instead of textures, it's gonna be tile map packed. Okay, tilemappack.png. Alright, save that. Okay, now it should work. And there you have it. That is our tile map being loaded to the screen. Of course, like I mentioned, you're not going to be able to see the whole thing because it's larger than our window. But another thing you probably notice is that we're only drawing the first layer here. So I want to draw the second layer. You could probably figure this out on your own, but I'm going to do it the simple way first. So I'm going to go back into my map object. And, you know, I could just rename this tiles layer 1, or I could store each tile as its own layer, or each tile layer as its own layer. So I could do this in a table, like so. I could do it this way, mapdef.layers2.data, because the second layer is also a tile map. You know, normally you probably would not want to do it this way. You probably want to use a for loop, like you'd want to first of all iterate through the entire table and then count each layer that's a tile layer, and then you would store each layer. But because I know that my map has exactly 2 tile layers, I can just do it this way. So I can actually just store each one in a table. But now I have to go and I have to change this. So we have here our getTile function. So now I want to pass in a new parameter. And the parameter I want to pass in is a layer. So this is going to be layer 1. But I have to refactor some things here, so I have to change this to layer. Now I have to pass in the layer. And we could say like layer equals layer or 1, which essentially means if the user didn't pass in a layer number, just assume that it's 1. And we can actually put that here. So we can do layer now. So that gets our first tiles table, and then whatever data is there. And we could do the same thing here. So now I'm going to pass in a layer, and then tile type. Well, I'll make that the last parameter, layer. So once again, layer equals layer or 1. And then we can pass that in here. Okay, save that. But we still haven't drawn the second tile. So we can do the same thing here. We could just copy and paste this. So now instead of getting from the first layer, we can get from the second layer. So I'm reusing the tile variable, and it's essentially the same code. Let's save that again. Okay. The moment of truth. Isn't it beautiful that we've now loaded in a table with multiple layers? Of course, we'll also do the entities or the objects as well, and some collision walls. But for now, I think that's looking nice. But of course, the next thing I want to do is be able to move around my map and see if the whole thing is being loaded properly. So I'm just going to create like a very rudimentary camera, like just a very simple camera, just to test things out. It's not the sort of camera you'd want to use in a final game, but just something that allows me to move around my scene. Okay, so off camera, I've created this new object in my main file called camera, and it has an X and a Y, and then it has an update function. I'm not going to explain every line of code here just because it has nothing to do with this tutorial, but I'm just using the keyboard's WS, A, and D keys to change the position of my camera. So it's just like a game object, like I'm just moving a game object around, and then I'm updating it here in love.update. So what I'm going to do is basically the same thing that I had with my offset. So back in the map object, we have this screen X and screen Y value. So just like with my offset, but this time I'm going to subtract it. So I'm going to subtract the camera's X, and then I'm going to subtract the camera's Y. Now this is not an optimized way to do things, because what I'm doing essentially is drawing every single tile in my map. But I mean, maybe in a future video coming up, I'm gonna show you a more optimized solution. But just for now, I think this will cut it, so save that. And let's see how that looks. So if I move my W, S, A, and D keys, I can move my world around. So you see what's happening is everything is being drawn relative to that camera. And I think I'm going to speed that up a bit. So I'm going to change the camera speed to 300. I'll make it 400. Much better. And you can certainly see that there's a little bit of tearing with our tile map. And that probably has to do with the filtering mode that we're using here. Yeah. I mean, maybe one thing I can do actually is I could take this and, or actually I could take the camera's position. So I can do gcamera.x equals map.floor gcamera.x, and the same with the y. This is something you often have to do with pixel art. Okay. Yeah, that's much better. You see, because we're working with pixel art here, you know, the pixel grid is sort of being drawn with integer values. So what we essentially need to do is just sort of round down the camera's position so everything is drawing, all the pixels are being drawn cleanly to the grid, if that makes any sense. And the more important thing is the whole map is being drawn. There you have it. Of course, we need to optimize things and only draw what's actually on the screen instead of the whole map. And there are things you can do like smooth out the camera and all that. That's a subject for another video. But there is one thing I want to do in this video. Well, you know how we're getting our map information, like the width and height from the map? Well, there's one thing I didn't talk about, and that's tile sets. So back here in Tile, you know, we're drawing from this sprite sheet right here. Well, that's its own object that's being saved in the data. You see it says here tile sets and then tile sheet 1. So what I think I'm going to do is copy this name right here. And let's say like our game has more than one tile sheet. Like this is something I'll often have in my own games and probably yours as well. So if you remember from last time, we're storing all of the texture right here in this one texture file. And then we have like this texture quad right here. Well, what I'm going to do is actually change the name of this. I'm going to change it to gTileTextures, just for the sake of consistency. And I'm going to turn this into a table. And now inside my table, I'm going to have a name. So I'm going to copy and paste the name that I have. And I'm going to store it like that. Now if you don't know what this means, this is a dictionary now. So that means that we can now look up this information by typing tile textures and then using that name to get that information. So this is the key of the dictionary and this is the value that it gives you. I mean, if you're following this tutorial, I hope you already know that. Anyways, I'll do the same thing here. I'll turn this whole thing into a table. You know, why am I doing this? Because I'll probably want to have more than one tile map. And I'll use the same name. Like you want to make sure that these two things are the same, basically. Oops. Okay. Tile texture. Oh, right. It's gTileTextures, and then we gotta put that in there too. And it's still not happy, right? Sorry, I'm still trying to get used to Hungarian notation, which is why, things are starting with a G right there, meaning global. Okay. So now in our map file, we actually have to make use of that. So we're going to create a new object here called Tileset, and it's just going to store that as a string. So mapdef.tileset, tilesets. It's going to be tilesets1. Right, because tile can actually use more than one tile set per map, which is interesting. But I only usually use one tile set per map. And I think it was name. Yeah, name. Okay, so the first tile set's name. It's going to store that as a string. I mean, maybe what you can do is you could you could actually store the textures. So I can go this dot tile texture is equal to gTileTextures, and then I can do this dot tile set, and then I can do the same thing with the quads. This dot tile quad is equal to gTileQuads, sorry, this dot tile set. Well, I hope it's not too difficult to understand what I'm doing here. So I'm getting a reference to the texture and then that set of quads that we created in the main file. Okay. So now instead of drawing tile texture, I'm gonna draw tile self.tile texture. And then self.tile quads. I'll just copy and paste this. Now, if all worked out well, it should be the same as before. A nil value. Oops, I forgot to save this. Silly me. Okay, let's try it now. Still a nil value. Oh, I realize now what the problem is. I forgot to... I was declaring these before I declared the map definition, before I declared the map. So I just gotta move that to the top. And also the same with my create quads function. Sorry about that, folks. Okay, if I save that, it should now work. There we go. It works fine. And you know, now our map can dynamically set the tile set from the map data. So even if I change my tile set, things will still work fine just as long as the string names are correct. Okay. I hope you found this video helpful. I know it was a very long one, but this is some pretty dense stuff. So, if you found this helpful, like and subscribe. Thank you. Have a nice day.